They say that family should be our sanctuary, but sometimes it becomes the very place where our deepest wounds are inflicted. My name is Esther Blackwood, and for 12 years, I believed that supporting my son's dreams meant sacrificing my own financial security. I was terribly mistaken. The day I realized the true nature of my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law wasn't when they forgot my birthday for the third year running, or when they asked me to watch their children every weekend for a month straight without so much as a thank you. It was when my daughter-in-law Kenna looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We've decided it would be best if you skipped Easter with us this year. Dawn's parents are hosting, and honestly, Esther, you just don't fit in with that crowd." Those casual words shattered something inside me. After everything I had done, after withdrawing from my retirement account to help them secure their dream vacation property in the mountains, after making the monthly payments on that same property for over 5 years, after rearranging my entire life to be available whenever they needed childcare, I was being told I wasn't refined enough to sit at their Easter table. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. If I wasn't family enough to be included in their holiday gathering, perhaps I wasn't family enough to continue subsidizing their lavish lifestyle in a vacation home they rarely used. What happened next changed everything for them, and especially for me. I never expected my retirement years to unfold this way. At 64, I thought I'd be surrounded by family, perhaps tending to my garden and enjoying occasional trips with friends. Instead, I found myself alone in my modest home in Willowbrook, clutching my phone and staring at a text message that confirmed what I had long suspected, that my financial support was welcome, but my presence was not. My journey began in Willowbrook, Minnesota, a town just big enough to have its own community theater, but small enough that neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was sick. I started working as a high school art teacher right after college, and that's where I met Abraham, my late husband. He was the school's beloved history teacher, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, and a passion for woodworking that filled our garage with the scent of pine and possibility. We married young, bought a small craftsman house on Elm Street, and dreamed of filling it with children and laughter. Life, however, had other plans. After years of trying and 2 heartbreaking miscarriages, we were blessed with only one child, Joshua. From the moment he was placed in my arms, I knew I would do anything for him. When he showed early signs of asthma at age 4, I reduced my teaching hours to care for him during the worst months of allergy season. Those nights spent monitoring his breathing, the rush to the emergency room when an attack was particularly severe. They bonded us in a way I thought was unbreakable. Abraham and I poured everything into giving Joshua the best life possible. We saved diligently for his college education, driving older cars and foregoing vacations, so we could provide opportunities we never had. When he showed remarkable talent for music, we scrimped to buy him his first quality violin. When he wanted to attend an expensive summer music program at Interlochen, I took on private art lessons after school to make it happen. Abraham never got to see Joshua graduate from college. A stroke took him when Joshua was just 19, leaving me a widow at 46. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and remaining mortgage payments. I was devastated, but I had Joshua to think about. "Mom, maybe you should sell the house," Joshua suggested one evening about a month after we lost Abraham. "It's too big for just you, and the money could help with my tuition." I remember feeling a twinge of hurt at his words. This was our family home, filled with memories of Abraham, but I brushed the feeling aside. Of course, Joshua was thinking practically. He was grieving too, in his own way. "This is our home," I told him gently. "Your father and I worked hard for it. Besides, where would you stay during breaks? No, I'll pick up extra classes instead." And that's exactly what I did. For the next 3 years, I taught full days at school and offered private art lessons, every evening and weekend. By the time Joshua graduated with his music education degree, I was exhausted but proud. He was the first in our family to receive a college education. "I did it, Mom," he said, hugging me after the ceremony. "I couldn't have done it without you." Those words meant everything to me at the time. Joshua landed a position teaching orchestra at a prestigious private school in Oak Ridge, about 30 miles from Willowbrook. I was overjoyed that he wouldn't have to move far away. As he settled into his career, I continued teaching at the high school, where I had been named department chair. Then, during Joshua's second year of teaching, he met Kenna Harrington. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from one of the wealthiest families in Oak Ridge. Her father, Don, was a successful investment banker, and her mother, Zelda, was known for her lavish charity galas and impeccable taste. From the start, I could tell they lived in a different world than we did. "Mom, I want you to meet Kenna," Joshua said when he brought her home for dinner the first time. "She's the new development director at school, and she's amazing." Kenna was polite but distant that evening. She glanced around my modest living room, her eyes lingering on the handmade quilts and the watercolor paintings I had created over the years. "Your home is quaint," she said, in a tone that made it clear she meant otherwise. "Joshua tells me, you've lived here your whole married life?" "Yes," I replied warmly, trying to bridge the gap I already felt forming. "Abraham and I bought it when we were just starting out. It's nothing fancy, but it's filled with love." Kenna smiled tightly. "Well, that's what matters, isn't it? Though Joshua and I have been looking at some properties in Lakeview Estates. Have you seen those new developments? They're absolutely gorgeous." Lakeview Estates was the most exclusive neighborhood in Oak Ridge. The houses there started at prices I couldn't even fathom. "That sounds lovely," I managed, catching Joshua's eyes. He looked away quickly. What I've since realized about family relationships is how easily they can transform from unconditional love into complicated transactions. The subtle shift happens so gradually that you barely notice it, like water slowly rising around you until suddenly you're drowning. Looking back, I can pinpoint moments when I should have recognized the changing tides. There was the Christmas when Joshua and Kenna gave the Harringtons lavish gifts, a weekend at a luxury spa for Zelda and an expensive watch for Dawn, while I received a generic scarf with the price tag still attached. Or the time when my grandson, Curtis, had his first piano recital, and I wasn't told about it until after it happened because, as Kenna explained, "We didn't want to bother you since you're so busy with your classes." These small exclusions and thoughtless gestures accumulated, like sediment, hardening into a pattern I chose to ignore. Why? Because acknowledging the truth would mean facing a reality too painful to accept, that the child I had sacrificed everything for viewed me primarily as a financial resource rather than a beloved parent. The next day after agreeing to help with their mortgage, I spoke with the principal about taking on additional art classes. Imogene Crawford, who had been my colleague for over 20 years, looked concerned when I explained my request. "Esther, you're already teaching a full load plus your after-school program," she said, her brow furrowed. "Are you sure you can handle more? This isn't like you." "I need the money," I admitted, uncharacteristically blunt. "Joshua and Kenna are having financial difficulties." Imogene's expression shifted subtly. She had met Joshua and Kenna at school functions and had never said anything negative, but I could read her thoughts in the careful way she chose her next words. "They live in Lakeview Estates, don't they? In that beautiful Tudor we all saw pictures of at the staff Christmas party." I nodded, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "And now you're working extra hours to help pay for it." She shook her head slightly. "Esther, may I speak frankly? As your friend, not just your principal?" "Of course." "You've spent your entire life putting Joshua first. You worked yourself to exhaustion to put him through college after Abraham died. And now, when you should be preparing for retirement, you're taking on more work to subsidize a lifestyle that She hesitated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That seems somewhat extravagant for a young couple just starting out. Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they reflected thoughts I had been suppressing. "They're just going through a rough patch," I said defensively. "All young couples do." Imogene sighed. "I can give you 2 additional evening classes for the advanced placement students. But promise me you'll take care of yourself, Esther. You matter too," I promised, though I knew it would be a promise hard to keep. For the next 2 years, I paid Joshua and Kenna's mortgage without complaint. Each month, I transferred the money directly to their account, often skipping lunch in the school cafeteria to save a few dollars. I postponed needed repairs on my own home, let my car go longer than I should have without servicing, and declined invitations from friends if they involved spending money. During this time, my relationship with Joshua and Kenna gradually shifted. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. The phone calls grew shorter, the excuses more frequent. Kenna rarely asked about my life anymore, and when I visited their home, I couldn't help but notice how they'd redecorated lavishly while I was pinching pennies to keep them afloat. "The new sectional is gorgeous," I commented during one visit, eyeing what must have been a very expensive piece of furniture. "It's from that designer showroom in the city," Kenna said casually. "We decided we deserve to splurge a little. Mental health is important, you know." I bit my tongue, thinking of the leaky faucet in my bathroom I couldn't afford to fix. That same evening, I overheard Kenna on the phone with her mother. "I know, Mom. It's exhausting having to include her in everything. But Joshua feels obligated, you know. At least she helps out financially." My cheeks burned with humiliation. Helps out financially. I was paying their entire mortgage, sacrificing my own well-being to maintain their lifestyle. And this was how she characterized my contribution. But the real turning point came the week before Easter of last year. I had been battling persistent migraines for weeks, pushing through my classes despite feeling increasingly fatigued. Imogene noticed me leaning against the wall one afternoon, trying to catch my breath between classes. "That's it, Esther," she said firmly. "I'm sending you to Dr. Goldstein right now. This has gone on long enough." The diagnosis came back the next day: severe exhaustion complicated by high blood pressure that had gone untreated for too long. "You need rest," Dr. Goldstein insisted. "Complete rest. I'm putting you on medical leave for at least 3 weeks, I protested, thinking of the mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, but he was adamant. "This isn't negotiable. Your health has to come first." For the first time in years, I had to think about my own needs. As I lay in my bed that evening, listening to the spring rain against my window, I made a decision. I would call Joshua, explain the situation, and ask if they could handle their mortgage for a month or 2 while I recovered. When I phoned the next morning, Kenna answered. "Esther," she said, her voice cool. "Joshua's in a meeting. Can I take a message?" "It's important, Kenna. I need to talk to him about the mortgage payment." There was a pause. "The mortgage payment? What about it?" "I'm on medical leave, exhaustion, and high blood pressure. I won't be able to work extra classes for a while, so I was hoping you and Joshua could cover the mortgage until I'm back on my feet." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. "Kenna, did you hear me?" "I heard you," she said, her voice suddenly hard. "So you're saying you won't be sending the money this month?" The way she phrased it, like it was an obligation, not a sacrifice I'd been making, stung deeply. "I can't, Kenna. I'm ill." "We're counting on that money, Esther," she cut in. "We have plans. We've already booked our vacation house in the mountains for the summer." I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. They had money for a vacation house, but not for their own mortgage. "I've been covering your mortgage for 2 years, I said quietly. "I think you and Joshua can manage for a month while I recover from exhaustion." Her laugh was short and dismissive. "Right. because that makes up for everything Joshua did for you after his father died." "What?" The question came out as barely, more than a whisper. "He told me how you leaned on him completely after Abraham died, how he had to be your emotional support when he was barely 20, how he stayed local for college because you couldn't handle being alone." Each word felt like a slap. That wasn't what happened at all. I had held myself together for Joshua's sake, worked extra hours to keep him in college, encouraged him to follow his dreams. "That's not true, Kenna. Look," she said with exaggerated patience. "We all know you've been helping with the mortgage because you wanted to be involved in our lives. And that's fine. But don't try to use your health as leverage." When Joshua and Kenna announced their engagement 6 months later, I was happy for my son but concerned about the differences in backgrounds and expectations. Still, I embraced Kenna and tried my best to be involved in the wedding planning. "Esther," Zelda Harrington said during our first meeting to discuss the wedding, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured dismissively. "We've already reserved the Oak Ridge Country Club and hired the top wedding planner in the state. We'll handle all the arrangements. You don't need to worry about a thing." I felt sidelined but reminded myself that this was about Joshua and Kenna, not me. I offered to help with the rehearsal dinner. "Oh," Zelda exchanged glances with Kenna. "We've actually already booked La Maison for the rehearsal dinner. Don has connections with the owner." "I see," I said quietly. "Well, is there anything I can help with?" Kenna patted my hand as if I were a child. "We know you want to contribute, Esther. Maybe you could help with assembling the wedding favors?" I swallowed my pride and nodded. After all, wasn't it a mother's job to support her child's happiness? Even when it stung. The wedding was extravagant. 6 bridesmaids in designer gowns, ice sculptures at every table, and a band that had apparently once played for a minor celebrity. I felt out of place in my best dress, a simple teal sheath I'd purchased at the department store, which suddenly seemed woefully inadequate among the Harringtons' social circle. Joshua spent most of the reception with Kenna's family, stopping by my table only briefly. "Are you having a good time, Mom?" he asked, his bow tie slightly loosened after hours of dancing. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything is beautiful. I'm so happy for you." He smiled, relieved. "Kenna's dad is talking about introducing me to the headmaster at Westfield Academy. Says I have potential beyond just teaching orchestra at a single school." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it despite the nagging feeling that Joshua was being pulled further into the Harringtons' orbit and further from me. After the honeymoon, Joshua and Kenna started house hunting in earnest. They invited me along. One weekend to see a house in Lakeview Estates, a sprawling Tudor with 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a professionally landscaped yard. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" Joshua asked, his eyes bright with excitement. It was beautiful, but I couldn't help wondering how they could afford it. Joshua had a good job, but he'd only been teaching for a few years, and I knew he still had substantial student loans. "It's lovely," I said. "But sweetheart, are you sure it's within your budget?" Kenna's smile tightened. "My parents are helping, with the down payment as a wedding gift. We've run the numbers, and we can make it work." What I didn't know then was that making it work would soon involve me. About a month after they moved in, Joshua called me, his voice strained. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a bit of a bind. The property taxes here are higher than we expected, and with the new furniture and Kenna's car payment—" "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. $4,000 would help us get caught up, he said, sounding relieved that I hadn't questioned him further. I withdrew the money from my savings the next day. It wasn't easy. I had been putting away a little each month for a small condo I hoped to buy eventually, something easier to maintain as I got older. But Joshua needed me, and that's what mattered. This became a pattern over the next year. Every few months, Joshua would call with another temporary financial emergency. The custom window. Treatments needed replacing. Kenna's position at the school was being restructured, and she needed to invest in additional certifications. They had to replace the hardwood floors because Kenna didn't like the color. Each time, I dipped further into my savings. Each time, Joshua promised it was just until they got back on their feet. Each time, the thank you notes and calls became shorter and less frequent. Then came the biggest request of all. Joshua showed up at my house one evening alone. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with his homework, where we'd shared meals after Abraham died, where we'd planned his future. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," he began, fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Kenna and we're struggling with the mortgage. The interest rate adjusted up, and with everything else..." My heart sank. I already knew what was coming. "How far behind are you?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. 2 months. But it's not just that. The payment is just too high for us right now. Kenna's father had some business setbacks, so they can't help anymore. I took a deep breath. "What are you asking, Joshua?" "If you could help with the mortgage for a while, just until I get the department chair position I'm up for, or until Kenna finds a better position." "We don't want to lose the house, Mom. We've made it our home." Our home. The words echoed in my mind as I thought about the house that Abraham and I had worked so hard for, the home where I'd raised Joshua, which Joshua had suggested I sell after his father died. Still, I agreed. I couldn't bear the thought of my son and his wife being forced out of their home, facing the embarrassment of foreclosure. "I'll need to pick up more art classes," I said. At 62, the long days were becoming harder on my body, but I would manage. Joshua's relief was palpable. "You're the best, Mom. I promise we'll pay you back once we're on solid ground again." That night, after he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and calculated what this would mean for me financially. The mortgage payment on their Lakeview home was nearly twice what I paid for my own house. To cover it, I would need to postpone my own retirement indefinitely and drastically cut back on my already modest expenses. But what choice did I have? He was my son, my only child, my last connection to Abraham. I was speechless. In what universe was paying someone's mortgage considered? Wanting to be involved? The realization of how my son and daughter-in-law viewed my sacrifices hit me like a physical blow. "I'll talk to Joshua tonight," I finally managed to say. "Please have him call me." But Joshua didn't call that night or the next. When he finally reached out 3 days later, he sounded rushed and defensive. "Mom, Kenna told me about your conversation. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but we really need that payment. We've already committed to renting a vacation home in the mountains for July, and we had to put down a non-refundable deposit." "Joshua," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my high blood pressure. "I've been paying your mortgage for 2 years. 2 years of extra classes, of skipping meals, of putting off repairs on my own home. I'm asking for a short break while I recover from a serious health condition." There was silence on the other. "And then, so you're keeping track? I thought you were helping because you wanted to, not because you expected something in return." His words hit me like a physical blow. How had we gotten here? When had my son become someone who could speak to me this way? "I don't expect anything in return except basic respect," I said, my voice breaking, "and perhaps some concern for my health." "Of course I'm concerned," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just bad timing. We've already made plans for the summer. The vacation rental in Aspen is non-refundable." "Obligations more important than your mother's health?" I asked. He sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "Let's not make this dramatic, Mom. Look, I'll see what we can do. Maybe we can send you half this month." "Half? After everything? He was offering half?" "Don't bother," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I'll figure something out." After we hung up, I sat in my silent house, truly seeing my situation for The first time. I had given everything to a son who viewed my sacrifices as obligations. I had emptied my savings to maintain his lifestyle while neglecting my own needs. I had worked myself into exhaustion for people who planned luxury vacations while I couldn't afford to fix my leaky faucet. Something fundamental had to change, and it had to start with me. The next day, despite still feeling weak, I made 2 important calls. The first was to my bank to stop the automatic transfer to Joshua and Kenna's account for their mortgage. The second was to my old friend Beatrice Thompson, a retired English teacher who had been trying to get me to join her volunteer group at the Community Arts Center for years. "Esther Blackwood," she said warmly when she picked up. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" "I was wondering if that offer to join your watercolor class is still open," I said, surprising myself with how light my voice sounded. "Always. We meet on Thursdays at the center. But aren't you usually teaching then?" "Not anymore," I said. "I'm making some changes." As I recovered from my exhaustion over the next 2 weeks, I received multiple texts and calls from Joshua, each more urgent than the last. Where was the mortgage payment? Had I forgotten to transfer the money? Was there a problem with the bank? I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on getting well and reconsidering my priorities. I started painting again, something I had set aside when teaching and family obligations took over. I invited Beatrice over for tea. I even called my cousin Margaret in Colorado, whom I hadn't spoken to in months because I'd been too busy working extra classes. The day before Easter, Joshua finally showed up at my door. He looked harried, his normally neat hair uncombed, his eyes shadowed with stress. "Mom," he said as soon as I opened the door, "there's been some mistake with the mortgage payment. The bank says the transfer was canceled." I stepped aside to let him in, noticing how he barely glanced at me. Didn't ask how I was feeling. Didn't comment on my still evident weight loss from being ill. "It wasn't a mistake, Joshua," I said calmly as we sat in my living room. "I canceled the transfer intentionally." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because I'm no longer able to pay your mortgage. I'm focusing on my health and my future now." His face flushed with anger. "You can't just decide that without warning. We have commitments based on that money." "Like your vacation rental in Aspen?" I asked quietly. He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. "That's not fair. We work hard and we deserve a vacation." "And I deserve to retire someday," I countered. "I deserve to live without working myself into exhaustion. I deserve to be treated with respect by my son and daughter-in-law." Joshua ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "This isn't like you, Mom. You've always been there for me. And I always will be. Emotionally. But financially, you and Kenna need to stand on your own 2 feet now." He stood up abruptly. "Fine. We'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect us to rearrange our lives to include you when you're being this selfish." "Selfish?" The word hung in the air between us. "Easter is tomorrow," I said, changing the subject. "Will I see you and Kenna?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to the Harringtons. Kenna's mom is expecting us." "I see. And what about the family dinner the following weekend?" "We always do that for the kids to hunt for eggs." "In my garden." "About that," he said, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "Kenna's parents are hosting at their country club this year. It's going to be mostly their crowd, their family, friends from the club. Kenna thinks, we both think it might be awkward for you." And there it was. After everything I had sacrificed, after years of putting their needs before my own, I wasn't even welcome at their Easter celebration. "Awkward?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "It's nothing personal," Joshua said, already backing toward the door. "It's just a different crowd, you know. You probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway." But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Not really. I hope you have a lovely holiday. After he left, I stood in my doorway for a long time, watching the spot where his car had been parked. 34 years of motherhood, of putting him first, and this was where we had landed. A place where I was considered selfish for not working myself to death to pay for his lifestyle, where I wasn't welcome at Easter dinner because I didn't fit in with my own son's new life. That evening, I received a text from Kenna. Joshua told me about your decision. Very disappointed. Thought you cared about our family. Guess we know where we stand now. I didn't respond. Instead, I made another decision. One that would change everything. The next morning, rather than spending Easter alone feeling sorry for myself, I drove to the community center where Beatrice had organized a holiday meal for seniors who had nowhere else to go. Esther, I didn't expect to see you today, Beatrice exclaimed when she saw me walk in. I had a change of plans, I said simply. She didn't pry, just handed me an apron. Well, we're glad to have you. The fruit salad needs tossing. For the first time in years, I enjoyed a holiday meal without tension, without walking on eggshells, without carefully monitoring my words to avoid offending Kenna or her parents. The seniors at the community center were grateful for the company, the food, and the simple kindness of being remembered on a holiday. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. And with that peace came clarity about what I needed to do next. The Monday after Easter, I made an appointment with the lawyer who had helped me with Abraham's estate years ago. Martin Goldstein's office was exactly as I remembered it. Bookshelves lining the walls, the scent of coffee perpetually in the air, and a sense of calm competence that had comforted me during those dark days after losing my husband. Esther, Martin said warmly, rising from behind his desk to greet me. It's been too long. How can I help you today? I settled into the chair across from him, smoothing my skirt nervously. I need some legal advice about a financial situation with my son, Martin nodded, his expression turning professional. Tell me what's going on. I explained everything, how I'd been paying Joshua and Kenna's mortgage for 2 years, the recent conflict over my illness, and their exclusion of me from the Easter celebrations. As I spoke, Martin took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. Let me make sure I understand correctly. You've been making direct payments to their mortgage lender, but there's no formal loan agreement between you and your son? That's right. It was just a verbal understanding that they would pay me back someday when they were more financially stable. And approximately how much have you paid toward their mortgage over these 2 years? I had calculated this number precisely the night before. $87,000. Martin's eyebrows shot up. That's a substantial sum, Esther. And you mentioned you withdrew from your retirement savings to cover some of these payments? I nodded, feeling a flush of shame. I also picked up extra classes at school, but it wasn't enough. I've depleted almost all of my non-pension savings. I see. He leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. From a legal standpoint, without a written agreement, this money could be considered a gift rather than a loan. However, we could argue that there was an implied contract based on the pattern of payments and the verbal understanding. What are my options? I asked. Well, you could sue for repayment, though that would be a lengthy and potentially expensive process, not to mention the strain it would put on your relationship with Joshua. He paused. Or you could simply stop the payments as you've already done and let them handle the consequences. The thought of suing my own son made my stomach clench. I don't want to take legal action against Joshua. I just want to protect what I have left for my own future. Martin nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then I recommend documenting everything. Every payment you've made, any text messages or emails discussing these payments, and the circumstances surrounding them. Keep this documentation in case they try to make any claims against you in the future. Do you think they would do that? I asked, alarmed. I hope not. But in my experience, money can bring out the worst in people, even family. He hesitated, then added, There's one more thing to consider, Esther. If they default on their mortgage and the property goes into foreclosure, it could affect you if your name is on any of the loan documents. My heart skipped a beat. My name isn't on their mortgage, but I did co-sign on the lease for their vacation rental in Aspen this summer. Kenna said they needed it for networking opportunities with some of the families from the private school. Martin's expression grew concerned. In that case, if they default on that lease, the rental company could come after you for payment. How much was the rental fee? $12,000 for the month of July, I said quietly. He sighed. I strongly recommend you check the status of that account immediately. If they've failed to make the required deposits or payments, you may want to consider paying it off directly to protect your own credit and financial security. I left Martin's office with a clear action plan but a heavy heart. The reality of my financial vulnerability was sobering. I had spent years giving everything to my son, and now I needed to focus on protecting myself from further damage. My first stop was the real estate office that handled the Aspen vacation rental. After verifying my identity as a co-signer, the agent pulled up the account information. The balance due on the rental deposit is $6,000, she said, turning the screen slightly so I could see. The remaining $6,000 would be due on check-in. My mouth went dry. They had only paid half of the required deposit, despite telling me they had already put down a non-refundable deposit as justification for needing my continued mortgage payments. The first half of the deposit been paid? I asked. The agent clicked through a few screens. Yes, there was a payment of $6,000 on March 15th. Just before Easter, just before they told me I wasn't welcome because I wouldn't fit in with the crowd at the Harrington's Country Club. I'd like to cancel this reservation, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The agent looked surprised. There's a cancellation fee of $1,000 at this point. The remaining $5,000 of your deposit would be refunded. I understand. I'd like to proceed with the cancellation. It took nearly an hour to complete all the paperwork, but when I left, the reservation had been canceled and the refund was being processed to my account, not Joshua and Kenna's, since I was the co-signer. I had lost $1,000 in the cancellation fee, but it was far less than the $12,000 I would have potentially been liable for if they failed to pay the remainder. As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. I had just canceled a luxury vacation that my son and daughter-in-law had planned while simultaneously telling me I couldn't afford to take a break from paying their mortgage due to my health crisis. The pain of that reality was so profound it had circled around to numbness. At home, I found 3 missed calls from Joshua and a text message that read, "Need to discuss mortgage situation ASAP. Call me." I set my phone aside without responding. I needed time to process everything before engaging with him again. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad, taking stock of my financial situation. After paying the cancellation fee on the vacation rental, I had approximately $15,000 left in accessible savings, barely enough for 6 months of minimal expenses if I stopped working entirely. My teacher's pension would start at 65, providing a modest but dependable income. The equity in my house was substantial, but I had hoped to leave that to Joshua someday. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I had been saving for a future where I could help my son even after I was gone. Now I was facing the possibility of selling my home just to support myself in retirement. My phone rang again. Joshua this time. I answered. "Mom?" "Finally," he said, sounding irritated. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I had appointments," I replied simply. "Well, we need to talk about this mortgage situation. The payment was due yesterday and we got a late notice from the bank." "Yes, I imagine you did." There was a pause, as if he was taken aback by my calm tone. "So, Are you going to send the payment or not? Because if this goes on our credit report, I won't be making any more payments on your mortgage, Joshua, I interrupted. As I told you last week, I'm focusing on my own financial security now. Mom, you can't just… He stopped. Then his voice took on a wheedling tone I recognized from his teenage years when he wanted something expensive. Look, I know you're upset about Easter, but that's Kenna's family's tradition. It's not like we're excluding you deliberately. Except that is exactly what you're doing, I said quietly. Kenna specifically told me I wouldn't fit in with the crowd at the country club. She didn't mean it like that, he protested. It's just that her family does things differently. They're more formal. More formal than the woman who raised you? Who worked 60-hour weeks to put you through college? Who has been paying your mortgage for 2 years? That woman isn't formal enough to sit at an Easter table with your wife's family? The silence on the other end told me he had no good answer. Joshua? I continued, my voice softening. I love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But this relationship has become unhealthy. You and Kenna need to take responsibility for your own finances, and I need to prepare for my retirement. But the mortgage is your responsibility, not mine. By the way, I've canceled the Aspen vacation rental. You what? His voice rose in pitch. Why would you do that? Because I was a co-signer, and I couldn't risk my credit being damaged. If you and Kenna defaulted. We weren't going to default. We just needed some flexibility until after the summer. You know what? Fine. Do what you want. But don't expect us to rearrange our lives for you anymore. The call ended shortly after, with Joshua still upset but seemingly beginning to realize I wouldn't be swayed. I sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward, staring at the wall calendar where I'd circled the Easter family dinner date with a pastel marker months ago, anticipating spending it with my son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. The next morning, I received a text from Kenna. Joshua told me what you did. Canceling our vacation rental without discussing it with us first was manipulative and controlling. We had plans for that time. This is exactly why we need space from you right now. I read the message twice, marveling at the mental gymnastics required to frame my protecting myself from financial liability as manipulative. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the school to speak with Imogen about my return to work. The exhaustion had improved significantly, but I still tired easily and knew I couldn't handle the extra classes I'd been taking to cover Joshua's mortgage. Imogen welcomed me into her office, concern evident in her eyes. Esther, you're looking better, but not fully recovered. Are you sure you're ready to come back? Not to my previous schedule, I admitted. I was hoping we could discuss options for reduced hours. She nodded thoughtfully. We could move you to administrative work for a while. 3 days a week, regular daytime hours. The pay would be less, but… That sounds perfect, I interrupted. I've been reassessing my finances, and I've decided it's time to start my transition toward retirement. May I speak frankly? She asked, leaning forward in her chair. Of course. I've been concerned about you for some time, Esther. The hours you've been working aren't sustainable for someone your age, regardless of how dedicated you are. She hesitated. And I've observed that Joshua rarely visits you here, even when you've worked holidays or evening events. I felt a flush of embarrassment. Was my situation so obvious to others? Joshua has his own life, I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Imogen's gaze was gentle, but penetrating. We've worked together for what, 20 years now? In all that time, I've never seen someone give so much and ask for so little in return. I didn't know how to respond, uncomfortable with both the praise and the implicit criticism of my son. The administrative position starts next week if you're interested, she continued, changing the subject. Take the rest of this week to rest and recover fully. I thanked her and was about to leave when she added, Oh, and Esther, The school's Spring Art Festival is on the 25th. I hope you'll join us this year, since I recall you usually work that evening. The kindness in her invitation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'd like that, I managed to say before leaving her office. The next 2 weeks passed in relative calm. I adjusted to my new schedule at the school, finding the administrative work less physically taxing but intellectually engaging. I started attending Beatrice's watercolor class at the community center and even volunteered one weekend helping to organize a craft fair for local artisans. Joshua called twice more about the mortgage. Each conversation became increasingly tense as the reality of their financial situation was setting in, and neither he nor Kenna seemed prepared to make the necessary lifestyle adjustments. "We might have to sell the house," he said during our last call, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. "That might be the most sensible option," I replied calmly. "You could find something more within your means." "This is our home," he protested. "We've put so much into it, and what would Kenna's family think?" I bit back the observation that their concern with appearances had contributed significantly to their current predicament. "Joshua, there are worse things than downsizing to a home you can actually afford." "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "You've lived in the same house for 35 years. "Yes, a house your father and I could afford on our combined teachers' salaries, with careful budgeting and modest expectations." The conversation ended with him declaring, "We'll figure it out ourselves," as if that hadn't been exactly what I was suggesting all along. I didn't hear from either of them for several days after that, which gave me time to focus on my own healing, both physical and emotional. The distance helped me see the pattern of our relationship more clearly. For years, I had been enabling Joshua and Kenna's financial irresponsibility, all while being slowly edged out of their lives except when they needed money. Then, a week before Memorial Day, the doorbell rang. It was early evening, and I hadn't been expecting visitors. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Don Harrington, Kenna's father, standing on my porch. "Mrs. Blackwood," he nodded stiffly. "May I come in? There's a matter we need to discuss." I stepped aside to let him enter, noting the expensive golf shirt and designer watch he wore for what was clearly not a social call. "Can I offer you some tea or coffee?" I asked, falling back on basic hospitality despite my wariness. "No, thank you. This won't take long." He remained standing, eyeing my modest living room with the same barely concealed judgment his daughter had shown during her first visit years ago. "What can I do for you, Mr. Harrington?" I clasped my hands in front of me, determined to maintain my composure. He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting a posture reminiscent of a principal about to discipline a student. "I understand you've decided to withdraw your financial support from Joshua and Kenna's household." The way he phrased it made it sound like I was abandoning dependents rather than expecting grown adults to pay their own bills. "I've decided to focus on my own financial security," I corrected gently. "Joshua and Kenna are both employed adults, fully capable of managing their own finances." Don's mouth tightened. "Be that as it may, your decision has created significant hardship for them. The timing is particularly unfortunate with summer approaching and various social obligations to fulfill." I waited, sensing he was working his way to his actual point. "Kenna is quite distressed," he continued. "She tells me, you've not only stopped contributing to their mortgage, but also canceled a vacation rental they were relying on. A vacation rental for which I was legally responsible as a cosigner," I pointed out. "I was protecting myself from potential liability." He waved a dismissive hand. "Legally, perhaps you were within your rights, but surely you understand the position this puts them in socially. They've committed to hosting events, made plans based on certain financial expectations. Expectations that I would continue to work myself into exhaustion at age 64 to fund their lifestyle?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the indignation rising within me. Don had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. No one expected you to work yourself ill, Mrs. Blackwood. But a more gradual transition with proper notice would have been the considerate approach. I gave notice when I was diagnosed with exhaustion and high blood pressure, I said. I explained that I couldn't maintain the extra work necessary to cover their mortgage. Joshua and Kenna chose to prioritize a luxury vacation and social appearances over their own housing security. He frowned. That's Joshua's version. Be that as it may. It's the truth, I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. I have the bank statements and text messages to prove it. Don shifted his weight, clearly unused to being challenged. Regardless of the details, the situation is causing considerable stress to my daughter and, by extension, my wife and myself. We're hosting the Memorial Day barbecue at our country club with several prominent families attending. The last thing we need is for Joshua and Kenna to be distracted by financial worries. And there it was, the real concern. Not my son and daughter-in-law's financial stability, but how their stress might affect the Harringtons' holiday entertainment. What exactly are you asking of me, Mr. Harrington? I said, though I already knew the answer. I'm suggesting a compromise, he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. If you could resume the mortgage payments temporarily, just until after the summer, it would give them time to make arrangements, perhaps downsize as you suggested to Joshua. And why would I do that when I've already made it clear I need to prioritize my own financial security? Don reached inside his jacket and withdrew a checkbook. I'm prepared to offer you compensation for this inconvenience. The implied insult that my financial decisions were merely an inconvenience to their social calendar was breathtaking in its callousness. You want to pay me to resume paying my son's mortgage? I clarified, wanting to be absolutely certain. I understood this stunning proposition. Think of it as a consulting fee, he said smoothly, uncapping an expensive-looking pen. You temporarily resume the payments, allowing them to maintain appearances through the summer season, and I compensate you for your trouble. Simple business arrangement. I stared at Don Harrington, momentarily speechless. This man, this wealthy, privileged man who had never once invited me to his home despite years of family connection, was standing in my living room offering to essentially bribe me to continue enabling my son's financial dependence. Mr. Harrington, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm, I'm not interested in being paid to support my own son. If you're concerned about Joshua and Kenna's financial situation, perhaps you should offer to help them directly. He looked genuinely surprised, as if the concept of directly supporting his own daughter had never occurred to him. That's not how we do things in our family. We believe in financial independence. The irony was so rich I almost laughed. Financial independence facilitated by a 64-year-old art teacher working overtime to pay bills for two healthy adults in their 30s? His face hardened. I see Kenna was right about your attitude. This is precisely why we felt it would be awkward to include you in our Easter gathering. Because I expect adults to pay their own bills? Because you clearly harbor resentment toward my daughter and her lifestyle choices. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would accomplish nothing. Mr. Harrington, I don't resent Kenna or her choices. I simply can no longer subsidize them at the expense of my own health and financial security. He replaced his checkbook in his pocket with a sharp motion. Very well. I can see this conversation isn't going to be productive. I'll tell Joshua. And Kenna, they'll need to make other arrangements. That would be best, I agreed. As he moved toward the door, he paused, turning back with a calculating expression. You know, Esther, may I call you Esther? Many parents would be grateful that their child had married into a family of our standing. The connections alone are invaluable. I met his gaze steadily. Many parents would expect their daughter-in-law's family to treat them with basic courtesy and respect, regardless of standing. His lips thinned, but he offered no response as he donned his jacket. Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood, he said as he opened the door. Good evening, Mr. Harrington, I replied, closing the door firmly behind him. After he left, I leaned against the door, my heart racing as if I'd run a marathon. The entire interaction had been surreal, from Don Harrington's unexpected appearance on my doorstep to his brazen attempt to buy my continued financial support of Joshua and Kenna. More disturbing was the realization that this was how they all viewed me, as a resource to be utilized, an inconvenience when I failed to fulfill my designated role, a social embarrassment to be managed and excluded, not as a person with my own needs, feelings, and dignity. I moved to my kitchen and put the kettle on, needing the comfort of a hot cup of tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I glanced at the calendar again, at that circled Memorial Day weekend that now loomed as a day of solitude rather than family connection. For a moment, I felt a wave of doubt. Had I done the right thing? Should I have found a way to compromise, to ease Joshua and Kenna into financial independence more gradually? Was I punishing them for excluding me from Easter by withdrawing financial support? The kettle whistled, interrupting my spiral of self-doubt. As I prepared my tea, I reminded myself of the facts. I had worked myself into exhaustion trying to support my son's lifestyle. I had depleted my savings and put my own retirement at risk. I had been explicitly told I wasn't welcome at Easter dinner because I wouldn't fit in with the Harrington social circle. No, I wasn't punishing Joshua and Kenna. I was finally recognizing that I deserved better treatment than I had been receiving. I was establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Joshua's number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom?" He began without preamble, his voice tight with anger. "Did you just refuse money from Don Harrington?" So Don had wasted no time reporting our conversation. "I refused to. Be paid to resume paying your mortgage." "Yes." "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for us? For Kenna's father to have to come to you like that?" I closed my eyes, absorbing the fact that my son saw his father-in-law attempting to bribe me as somehow humiliating for them, not for me. "Joshua," I said quietly, "if you're embarrassed, it should be by the fact that your father-in-law felt he needed to intervene in your financial affairs, not by my refusal to accept payment for continuing to support you." "He was trying to help," Joshua protested. "And you threw it back in his face. Do you have any idea what that's going to do to Kenna's relationship with her parents? They're furious." "They're furious that I won't continue to work myself ill to pay your bills?" I clarified. "That seems like misplaced anger, don't you think?" "This isn't just about money anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "This is about you, deliberately trying to ruin our summer, our standing with Kenna's family. Everything." The accusation stung, all the more because I could hear in his voice that he genuinely believed it. In his mind, my decision to prioritize my own well-being was a deliberate attack on him and Kenna. "Joshua, I love you," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I think you need to take a step back and consider how you would feel if our situations were reversed. If I expected you to work extra hours to pay my bills, then excluded you from family gatherings because you wouldn't fit in. That's different," he muttered. "Parents are supposed to help their children. Adult children are supposed to become independent," I countered gently, "and to treat their parents with respect and gratitude, not as ATMs they can access whenever they want." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, with a coldness I'd never heard from him before, Joshua said, "You know what? Fine. Keep your money. Stay home alone for Memorial Day. I hope it's worth it." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat at my kitchen table, the tea cooling in front of me, and let the tears come. Not just for the immediate pain of Joshua's anger and rejection, but for all the years I'd spent believing that my sacrifices would someday be recognized and appreciated. For the gradual erosion of our relationship as Joshua and Kenna became more focused on appearances and status than on genuine connection. For the mother I'd been, who had failed to teach her son the value of gratitude and respect. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes, but a clearer mind. I couldn't control Joshua and Kenna's reactions or choices. I could only control my own. I called Beatrice and asked if the offer to join her family for the Memorial Day picnic was still open. "Of course," she exclaimed. "We'd love to have you. And don't worry about bringing anything fancy, just your wonderful self." Then I called Imogene to confirm I would attend the school's spring art festival. Her secretary sounded pleased. "Dr. Crawford will be delighted. She specifically asked me to make sure you were coming." Finally, I called my cousin Margaret in Colorado. We hadn't been close in recent years, partly due to distance, and partly due to the time constraints of my work schedule. "Esther," she said warmly when she answered. "What a lovely surprise." We talked for nearly an hour, catching up on each other's lives. When I told her in broad strokes about the situation with Joshua and Kenna, she was supportive without being judgmental. "It sounds like you're finally taking care of yourself," she said. "It's about time, if you ask me. You've always been the one to give until there's nothing left. I just never thought it would come to this with Joshua." "I didn't either," I admitted. Being excluded from Easter, having Joshua angry at me for not paying his bills. Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is letting our children face the consequences of their own choices. "You taught Joshua how to walk by eventually letting go of his hands," Margaret said wisely. "This is just the adult version of that." Her perspective was comforting, a reminder that stepping back wasn't abandonment, but rather a necessary part of parenting an adult child. "You know, Margaret," I added before we hung up, "I was planning to visit some art galleries in Denver this summer. Perhaps I could extend my trip and spend a few days with you?" The prospect of seeing my cousin, of reconnecting with family who valued my company, lifted my spirits considerably. "I'd love that," I said sincerely. "I'll send you the dates once. I've made the arrangements." As May turned to June, I began to embrace the changes in my life rather than simply reacting to them. I started sketching again, something I had loved in college but had gradually abandoned as work and family responsibilities took over. I joined a weekly hiking group through the community center, reconnecting with my body's strength after years of neglecting it. I even signed up for a weekend workshop on pottery at the local arts college, something I had always wanted to try. These new activities weren't just distractions from the situation with Joshua, they were reclamations of parts of myself I had set aside in the name of motherhood and sacrifice. With each class I took, each new friend I made, each painting I completed, I felt more like the woman I had once been, before loss and obligation had narrowed my existence. Meanwhile, my relationship with Joshua remained strained. He had stopped calling altogether after our last confrontation, communicating only through occasional terse text messages, usually related to the grandchildren or practical matters. Kenna had cut off contact completely. The most painful development came in mid-June when my grandson Curtis had his end-of-year piano recital. I had always attended his performances, but this time I received no invitation. I only learned about it afterward when my neighbor Doris, whose granddaughter attended the same music school, mentioned seeing Curtis perform. "He played beautifully," she said, unaware of the knife twisting in my heart. "You must be so proud." "I am," I managed to say. "He's very talented." That evening, I sent Joshua a text. "I heard Curtis's recital went well. I wish I could have been there." His response came hours later. It was a small venue, limited seating. An excuse that might have been believable if I hadn't attended the same recital series for the past 3 years, in the same auditorium that could seat 200 people. The message was clear. My presence was no longer welcome, even at my own grandson's performances. I allowed myself one evening of grief, sitting in my garden with Abraham's old cardigan wrapped around my shoulders despite the warm June night, crying for all that had been lost. Then I dried my tears, went inside, and emailed the director of the community art center about teaching a summer art class for children. If I couldn't be with my own grandchildren, perhaps I could share my love of art with others. My new routine was interrupted one Sunday afternoon in late June by an unexpected visitor. I was in the backyard, weeding my vegetable garden, when I heard the gate open. Looking up, I was surprised to see my 8-year-old granddaughter Imogene, named after my closest friend, standing hesitantly at the edge of the garden. "Grandma?" she called, her voice small and uncertain. I set down my trowel and stood, brushing soil from my hands. "Imogene, what a wonderful surprise!" She ran to me then, wrapping her arms around my waist in a fierce hug that brought tears to my eyes. When she pulled back, I noticed she was alone. "Sweetheart, where's your dad? Or your mom?" "Daddy's at a school meeting. Mommy's at the country club with Grandma Zelda. Curtis is at his friend's house." She looked down at her sneakers, scuffing one against the flagstone path. "I rode my bike. Don't be mad." I was momentarily stunned. Imogene was only 8, and while we didn't live far apart, perhaps a mile through residential neighborhoods, the idea of her making the journey alone concerned me. "I'm not mad," I assured her, leading her to the shade of the porch. "But I am worried. Does your mom know you're here?" She shook her head, a guilty expression crossing her face. "I left a note." I sighed, knowing I would need to call Kenna immediately, but dreading the conversation. "Let me get you some lemonade, and then we need to call your mom so she doesn't worry." In the kitchen, as I poured lemonade and found some cookies, Imogene perched on a stool at the counter, swinging her legs. "Grandma, why don't you come over anymore? Did we do something wrong?" The question, asked with such innocent directness, nearly broke my heart. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements, but that doesn't change how much I love you and Curtis. Mommy says you're being difficult," she continued, taking a cookie. "She told Daddy you chose your money over family. What does that mean?" I took a deep breath, struggling to find a way to explain the situation that wouldn't disparage her parents, but wouldn't lie to her either. Sometimes when people disagree about important things, they describe the situation very differently. Your mom and dad see things one way, and I see them another. But the important thing for you to know is that I will always love you, no matter what. She seemed to consider this, her small face serious. "Is that why we didn't invite you for Easter or Memorial Day? Because of the disagreement?" "Yes," I said simply. "That's silly," she declared with the perfect logic of an 8-year-old. "If you love someone, you should be with them on holidays." "I think so too," I agreed softly. After giving her a few minutes to enjoy her snack, I reached for my phone. "We need to call your mom now, Imogene. She'll be worried." The girl's face fell, but she nodded. I dialed Kenna's number, half expecting it to go to voicemail, but she answered on the second ring. "What?" The single word was clipped, hostile. "Kenna, it's Esther. Imogene is here with me." She rode her bike over. There was a sharp intake of breath. "She what? Put her on the phone right now." I handed the phone to Imogene, whose shoulders slumped. As she listened to what was clearly a stern reprimand. "Yes, Mommy. I'm sorry. I left a note. I just wanted to see Grandma." Her eyes filled with tears. "But why? I don't understand." My heart clenched as I watched my granddaughter trying to comprehend the adult conflicts that had disrupted her world. After a moment, Imogene handed the phone back to me, her lower lip trembling. "She wants to talk to you." "I'm coming to get her," Kenna said without preamble. "Have her ready in 15 minutes. "Of course," I replied evenly. "She's perfectly safe here, Kenna. We were just having lemonade." "Don't," she snapped. "Don't. Act like this is normal. You know very well you should have called me the moment she showed up." "I was about to call you when we went inside," I said, which was true. I would never keep her from you." Kenna made a sound of disbelief. "Just have her ready, and don't fill her head with your version of what's happened." The call ended abruptly. I turned to find Imogene watching me, tears now streaming down her face. "Am I in big trouble?" she asked. I knelt down to her level, gently wiping her tears with my thumb. "Your mom is just worried because you left without telling her exactly where you were going. That was dangerous, sweetheart. Even though you know the way, there are cars and strangers to think about." She nodded miserably. "I just miss you so much, Grandma. You didn't come to Curtis's recital or my field day at school. I got a ribbon in the relay race." "I would have loved to be there," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I'm so proud of you for winning that ribbon." We spent the next few minutes looking at my latest paintings and the tomato plants that were just beginning to flower in the garden. I tried to make the most of our brief time together, knowing it might be a while before I saw her again. When a car horn sounded from the driveway, Imogene's face fell. "That's Mommy." "We'd better go," I said, taking her hand. Kenna didn't even get out of the car. Her face was rigid with anger as she waited for Imogene to climb into the back seat. The little girl turned at the last moment, running back to give me one more fierce hug. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, kissing the top of her head. "So very much." As they drove away, I noticed Kenna's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel and the way she seemed to be speaking intensely to Imogene, even as they turned the corner. I returned to my garden, but the joy had gone out of the afternoon. The unexpected visit had been both a blessing and a painful reminder of all I was missing in my grandchildren's lives. That evening, I received a text from Joshua. "If you have any respect for us as parents, don't encourage Imogene to visit without permission again. She could have been hurt, and you didn't even call Kenna immediately." I started to type a defense, explaining that I had taken Imogene straight to the kitchen for a drink and was about to call when I did, but I stopped mid-sentence. Nothing I said would matter. In their narrative, I was now the villain, and no explanation would change that perception. Instead, I simply wrote, "I would never endanger Imogene. I love her and Curtis deeply, and I miss them. I hope someday we can find a way forward that includes me in their lives again." The response was immediate and cutting. "That depends entirely on you and whether you're ready to apologize and make things right." Make things right. The phrase echoed in my mind as I set my phone aside. In Joshua and Kenna's world, making things right clearly meant resuming financial support, accepting my designated role as benefactor without opinions or needs of my own. It meant funding their lifestyle while being excluded from their lives, except when convenient. For the first time, I faced a stark realization. There might not be a compromise possible here. If making things right required me to sacrifice my financial security and accept disrespect, it was a price I was no longer willing to pay, even for access to my beloved grandchildren. The weeks that followed Imogene's visit were among the loneliest I had experienced since Abraham's death. Despite filling my days with new activities and friendships, the absence of my grandchildren created an ache that nothing else could fill. I found myself pausing in stores to look at books Curtis might enjoy or art supplies that would have delighted Imogene. Each time, I would put the items back on the shelf, reminded of the gulf that now existed between us. My cousin Margaret called regularly, becoming a lifeline during this difficult period. "How are you really doing, Esther?" she asked during one of our evening conversations, somehow sensing my carefully constructed cheerfulness was just a facade. "I miss the children desperately," I admitted, my voice catching. "Curtis had his 9th birthday last week. I mailed a card and gift, but I don't even know if he received them. No one acknowledged they arrived." "Oh, Esther," Margaret sighed. "That's cruel, using the children this way." "They don't see it that way," I said, trying to be fair despite my pain. "In their minds, I'm the one who disrupted the relationship by withdrawing financial support. They believe I should make the first move toward reconciliation. By resuming payments for their mortgage and lifestyle? Margaret asked incredulously. Essentially, yes. And if you did, would they guarantee you access to the children? Would they include you in family gatherings and holidays? I thought about Don Harrington's visit, about Kenna's dismissive treatment, about Joshua's anger. Honestly, I doubt it. I think they'd take the money but continue to keep me at arm's length. I'd be good enough to fund their lifestyle but not refined enough for their social circle. Then it's emotional blackmail, Margaret said firmly. And giving in won't solve the fundamental problem. I knew she was right, but that knowledge didn't ease the ache of missing Curtis and Imogene, of wondering if they thought their grandmother had abandoned them or didn't care enough to be present for their special moments. As July approached, I threw myself into teaching the children's art class at the community center. Working with young people again, seeing their unbridled creativity, their delight in mixing colors and creating shapes, brought a joy I had almost forgotten. Many of the children reminded me of Curtis and Imogene at younger ages, and while those memories sometimes stung, they also reminded me that I had been a good grandmother, present and loving, regardless of what Joshua and Kenna might now believe. It was during one of these classes that I received an unexpected visit from Beatrice, who slipped into the back of the room while I was helping a young boy with his watercolor technique. When the session ended and the children had been collected by their parents, she approached me, her expression unusually serious. "I thought I'd find you here," she said. "Do you have time for coffee? There's something I think you should know." We walked to a small cafe around the corner from the community center. Once we had settled with our drinks, Beatrice leaned forward. "I saw Joshua yesterday," she began. "At the bank. I don't think he noticed me. I was in the other line, but I couldn't help overhearing his conversation with the loan officer. They were discussing the possibility of a mortgage modification due to financial hardship." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "I see. Esther, the loan officer, mentioned something about the property being at risk of foreclosure." Joshua looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled. Nothing like his usual polished self. A complicated tangle of emotions rose within me: concern for my son, vindication that my financial assessment had been accurate, guilt that I wasn't helping despite knowing they were struggling. "That's not all," Beatrice continued. "After he left the bank, I saw him get into his car in the parking lot. He just sat there for several minutes, his head in his hands. He looked defeated. I closed my eyes briefly, picturing my son alone in his car, overwhelmed by financial pressures he had never been prepared to handle. Despite everything, my heart ached for him. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "What will you do?" Beatrice asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to rush in and fix everything, the way I've always done. But I know that wouldn't really help him in the long run." "You're a good mother, Esther," Beatrice said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Whatever you decide." That evening, as I worked in my garden, I found myself thinking about the earliest days of Joshua's life. How tiny he had been, how completely dependent on me. I remembered teaching him to walk, steadying him when he stumbled, gradually letting go. As he gained confidence, I remembered his first day of kindergarten, how he had clung to my hand at the classroom door before gathering his courage and joining the other children. Parenting had always been a series of supportive presences followed by strategic absences, being there when needed, stepping back to allow growth and independence. Perhaps this current situation was simply the final and most difficult iteration of that lifelong dance. The following day, I made an appointment with Martin Goldstein again. This time, I arrived with a clear purpose and a folder of documents I had carefully assembled over the previous weeks. "I need to understand my options for helping my son without enabling destructive financial patterns," I explained as I settled into the chair across from his desk. Martin nodded thoughtfully. I've been wondering when you might come back. What are you considering? I opened the folder and laid out several documents: bank statements, property tax records for Joshua and Kenna's house, a draft budget I had created based on what I knew of their income and expenses. Joshua and Kenna are facing possible foreclosure, I said. Based on my calculations, they're overextended by about $3,000 per month, which explains why they needed my help with the mortgage. Even if they cut out all discretionary spending, their fixed expenses are simply too high for their income. Martin reviewed the numbers, occasionally asking questions or making notes. Finally, he sat back in his chair. "You've done your homework," he observed. "What exactly are you thinking of proposing to them?" "A one-time offer," I said firmly. "I'll help them sell the house in Lakeview and find something more affordable. I'll cover moving expenses and any gap in mortgage payments during the transition. But I won't resume ongoing support, and my help is contingent on them attending financial counseling." Martin considered this. "It's a generous offer that addresses the core problem without creating long-term dependency. But are you prepared for them to refuse?" "I am," I said, though the thought made my stomach clench. I've realized I can't control their decisions. I can only control my own actions and set healthy boundaries. "And what about access to your grandchildren?" Martin asked gently. I swallowed hard. "That's the most painful part. I hope that by approaching this as help rather than criticism, Joshua and Kenna might be more open to rebuilding our relationship. But I can't make that a condition of my assistance. It would be another form of emotional manipulation, just from the other direction." Martin nodded approvingly. "That shows wisdom, Esther. Too often, I see families use money or children as leverage. It rarely leads to genuine healing." As I left his office with a clear plan, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and calm. I had no idea how Joshua and Kenna would respond to my proposal. They might see it as interference, as criticism, as too little too late. But for the first time in years, I felt I was acting from a place of genuine love rather than fear or obligation. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted an email to Joshua and Kenna. I wrote and rewrote it several times, striving for a tone that was warm but firm, helpful but not enabling. The final version was simple and direct. "Dear Joshua and Kenna, I would like to meet with you both to discuss a possible way forward that might help with your current financial situation. I'm not offering to resume mortgage payments, but I do have a proposal that could help you transition to a more sustainable financial position. I love you both, and I miss Curtis and Imogene terribly. Whatever happens with our financial discussions, I hope we can find a way to heal our family relationships. Would you be willing to meet this Sunday afternoon at 2 WAOG? I could come to your house or you're welcome at mine. Love, Mom." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then sat back and waited for a response that might never come. To my surprise, a response came from Joshua the very next morning. "We'll meet at your house, Sunday at 2. No greeting, no acknowledgement of my mention of the children, no indication of whether they were open to my proposal. Just 7 words confirming the logistics. Still, it was more communication than we'd had in weeks, and I chose to see it as a positive sign. I spent the next few days preparing, not just the financial information I wanted to share, but also my home. I baked Joshua's favorite almond cookies, arranged fresh flowers from my garden, and set out recent photos of myself with Curtis and Imogene that had been taken before our estrangement. I wanted my home to feel welcoming, a reminder of family, connections beyond financial transactions. Sunday arrived with clear skies and warm temperatures. At precisely 2 hours, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I opened the front door to greet Joshua and Kenna. They looked tired. Joshua's usually neat appearance was rumpled, his eyes shadowed by dark circles. Kenna's designer clothes couldn't disguise the tension in her shoulders or the tightness around her mouth. Neither smiled as they entered. "Thank you for coming," I said, leading them to the living room where I had set out coffee and the freshly baked cookies. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." Joshua sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa. Kenna remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. "You said—" "You had a proposal," Joshua said without preamble. "What is it?" I took a seat across from them, determined to remain calm despite their evident hostility. "Before I get to that, I want to say something important. I love you both, and nothing that's happened changes that. I want us to find a way forward that respects everyone's needs." Kenna made a small sound of disbelief but said nothing. "I understand you're facing possible foreclosure," I continued. "I'd like to help, but in a way that creates a sustainable solution rather than a temporary fix." "What do you mean by help?" Joshua asked cautiously. I outlined my proposal, helping them sell the Lakeview house and find something more appropriate for their income, covering moving expenses, and assisting with financial counseling. As I spoke, I saw Joshua's expression shift from skepticism to consideration. Kenna's remained rigidly opposed. "So your help comes with conditions," she said when I finished. "Typical." "They're not conditions, Kenna," I replied gently. "They're guidelines for creating a solution that actually addresses the problem. Continuing to pay your mortgage would only postpone the inevitable while depleting my retirement savings." "It's humiliating," she said, her voice rising. "Selling our home, moving to a cheaper neighborhood, admitting we can't afford the lifestyle we've built? Do you have any idea what that would do to our standing in the community? What my parents would say?" "I understand pride is at stake," I acknowledged. "But bankruptcy or foreclosure would be far more humiliating, wouldn't it?" Joshua, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Mom's right, Kenna. We can't keep going like this. The credit cards are maxed out, we're 3 months behind on the mortgage, and your father made it clear he won't bail us out." Kenna turned to him, shock and betrayal on her face. "You're taking her side?" "I'm being realistic," Joshua said tiredly. "We need help, and Mom is offering a practical solution." In that moment, I saw a glimmer of the son I had raised, the thoughtful boy who could admit when he was wrong, who valued honesty over appearances. It gave me hope that perhaps we could find our way back to a healthier relationship. The road to rebuilding our family relationship wasn't smooth or quick. After that initial meeting, Joshua and Kenna accepted my offer with reluctance. Joshua, with a growing sense of realism, Kenna with barely concealed resentment. Within 2 months, they had sold the Lakeview house and moved to a comfortable but much more modest home in a neighborhood of young families and first-time homebuyers. The financial counseling was perhaps the most difficult part for them. Facing the reality of their spending habits, the unsustainable lifestyle they had built on debt and my support, required a humility neither was accustomed to. But slowly, I saw changes. Not just in their financial decisions, but in their perspectives on what truly mattered. The first real breakthrough came 3 months after our meeting, when Joshua called to invite me to Curtis's fall piano recital. "He's been asking about you," Joshua said, an uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. "We both have. I owe you an apology, Mom, for a lot of things." Hearing those words, the acknowledgement I had longed for but never demanded, brought tears to my eyes. "I'd love to come," was all I could manage to say. That recital marked the beginning of a gradual healing. I wasn't immediately welcomed back into all family gatherings, but the door that had been firmly closed now stood slightly ajar. Kenna remained distant, but she no longer actively prevented me from seeing the children, and over time, even her frosty demeanor began to thaw. As for me, I continued pursuing the new interests and friendships I had developed during our estrangement. Teaching art at the community center became a regular part of my life. My relationship with Beatrice and other friends deepened. I traveled to Colorado to visit Margaret, discovering a joy in exploration I had forgotten I possessed. The most profound change, however, was internal. I had learned to value myself, to set boundaries without guilt, to recognize that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being. These weren't easy lessons, especially at 64, after a lifetime of putting others first, but they were necessary ones. 1 year after that fateful Easter when I was told I didn't fit in, I found myself sitting at the Harringtons' Easter table, not because I had resumed financial support, but because both families had found a new understanding of what truly constituted wealth. Not the expensive furniture or luxury vacations, but the bonds that connect generations, the wisdom shared across time, the unconditional but boundaried love that allows everyone to grow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.